Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks, what's next in a world without God? If you're enjoying the show so far, make sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon.
As the number of non-religious people increases, the struggle for greater separation of church and state, and for the rights of non-religious people, continues. Once we remove the blinkers of a religious worldview, we open a world of possibilities to allow greater freedoms and rights grounded in secular reason that possibly extend beyond just humans. To talk more about these issues of humanism and animal rights, we're excited to be joined by Monica Miller, the legal director and senior counsel for the American Humanist Association, and an attorney with the Nonhuman Rights Project. Monica, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks, Monica, for joining us. Maybe we can just start just by asking, what is your own religious background, and how did you get involved with secular activism?
Sure. So I think my parents are relatively agnostic. Like they never imposed religion on us. Even like Santa, I really kind of respect that my parents, I think my mom she was a 60s Berkeley kind of hippie-ish person, and I think that so some sort of like liberalism is kind of ingrained in her. And so anyway, the bottom line is like I think it was like come to your own conclusions, kids. And so like Santa was clearly my mom. Like her handwriting is pretty obvious, and I'm like, Mom, is that your handwriting? It says Santa, but it's your. And she's like, Yeah, I'm Santa, and I was like, Cool. And like, but then we went to Catholic school for 10 years. But it was because it was like the nice school down the road and my grandparents were paying for it. And it was like, okay. But that kind of, I think because I did grow up in a progressive liberal California pocket, being exposed to religion and kind of like a devout religion, like I had to go to mass and really, being ingrained in this religious faith that my parents never said was ours. So I didn't have to pay attention enough, and I always did really poorly in religion. So I did well in science. In fact, my science teachers are like following me on my social media, and they're like so proud of me from the Catholic school. It's such a weird small world. Yeah. It was so progressive enough. So anyways, all this is to say that like I think by the time I was in public school and not a Catholic, but having had all that exposure, but thinking kind of like there's only two religions. There was like Catholic and Jewish and maybe Episcopalian. I think I told the priest that I was like Episcopalian when we did our communion. Like my mom was like, just say that. So, it was anyway, like, so I took a world religions class as an elective at the community college because I was that weirdo in high school that was like, let me take an extra class. And like, I was like, okay. So I kind of felt like I didn't really believe in God, but I probably said I did because like, that's what you do. But I never really, I would ask for things, of course, like every kid probably does. And like the things he never delivered. It was like, can I please have a, unicorn? And no, there's no unicorn tomorrow. So it was pretty easy to like scientifically conclude there was this like no amount of prayers is making anything happen. And so anyway, but then realizing through this just community college course, all these other religions that were just as devout and certain that their religion was the right one, and that it was completely an accident of birth. If you were born in Egypt, you're going to have a very different religion than if you're born in Alabama. And so that being so obvious, it was just really easy to be like, yep, and I'm an atheist. And so then from there, I went on to Pitzer College and just kind of didn't do a whole lot in sort of secular stuff, but I was outwardly an atheist. And so one of my friends let me know my senior year after I did all my credits for my major in environmental studies. She was like, hey, this new course called Sociology of Secularism offered by Phil Zuckerman. It's like the first ever secularism class. I think you'll like
Friend
it.
of the show, Phil Zuckerman, Dr. Phil.
Yeah, my buddy Phil. And so so I took his course, and it was the first time I was exposed to like pro-atheist, like pro-humanist, pro-secular, like that I was exposed to separation of church and state as a concept. Because everyone was just, again, like there wasn't a lot of religious friction here. So there wasn't, I didn't realize there was so much friction in I didn't know what the Bible Belt was until taking this class. Or didn't comprehend it really. So, it was before we really had a lot of social media, like Facebook just launched. So it was harder to get a glimpse into what was going on, in Alabama than it is today. So anyways, that was sort of my pathway to becoming a church state litigator.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, Monica, that's a lot. And I'm really surprised because I was raised Catholic, and the priest taught us very early that God answers all prayers, but the answer is usually no. That's the catch. That's why there's no unicorn.
No.
So how did you connect your activism to atheism? I'm sorry. That should be the other way.
Animal rights?
The atheism to activism. Was it in college when you started with nonprofits and NGOs, or did that come later?
Well, so I've actually always been interested in animal rights. Like since I was a kid, I decided I wanted to be a vegetarian really young, and I immersed myself in watching like Animal Planet that had a show called Animal Cops, and I wanted to be an animal cop. Like this was like maybe when I was like 10 or 11. And when I was in high school, like any sort of free writing assignment, I would focus it on, some sort of animal abuse issues, circuses, zoos, farms. And then, so when I went to college, like there wasn't like an animal rights or animal like law kind of major. There's environmental studies, which encompasses wildlife and other sort of animal issues. Like factory farming leads to climate change and stuff. So I kind of went through that route, but so it was actually through animal rights stuff that I got kind of more of my activism stuff from. So I think I was already kind of an activist at heart, but then I realized that the more I learned about church state issues, the more I realized this is so dumb. Like we're not going to get climate change legislation and animal rights. And when this was like back in the Bush days, but back when there was so much resistance then to climate change, that I'm like, we have to like fight at the base level. Like the base problem is this Christian conservative force that seems to be like, then it was like a latent force. Like we just, we sort of sensed it, but it wasn't what we see today. And it was like, okay, there's an avalanche coming. Like there's this, obviously couldn't predict this bad with me and whatever, but Trump and everything. But yeah, no, so anyway, I watched, it was my senior year after taking Phil's class, a documentary called Pledge of Allegiance Blues, featuring Michael Newdow, and he was the attorney who took the Under God case up to the Supreme Court, Under God and the Pledge. And I was like, oh, so like you can litigate these cases. Like that's the kind of law that I might want to do. And by the time I was in law school, my school did not have a secular law club. There was a very prominent Christian legal society, but there was no parallel. So that sort of niche like sort of propelled me. I was like, well, we have to have this club. And so then once I formed this club, someone was like, oh, hey, there's a group called the American Humanist Association. You should go check out to see if they have internships. So then I did that. So it kind of was like, oh, I got lucky that both I found this organization that did exactly the kind of animal rights law I want to do, and an organization that does separation of church and state. And there's really only a few of those. And both of them offered me a job out of law school. So I was able to take both and just juggle this dual career situation I have.
Yeah. But. Wow. So I guess we should start with the American Humanist Association. This is it's also a great story so far of how like you helped make things happen. I had no idea that there would be religious law students. There'd be religious groups in law schools.
Mm-hmm.
Are there many secular clubs in law schools throughout the U.S.?
I'm proud to say that they're growing, and I'm aware of some of the students that are strong activists. Like some of them are more merged in with the American Constitution Society. I was like, for some reason that didn't sound right because I'm so used to saying ACS, but one of those groups just held a panel where us secular lawyers from the different organizations were able to present to students concerned with church state issues. But we do have through our Humanist Legal Society, that's through the organization I work for, AHA, American Humanist Association. We also have students come to us and say, we're starting a student group that's a humanist or secular law thing. So I don't know how, I don't have a tally, and I'm certain that the number of humanist and secular law clubs is dwarfed by the Christian legal societies. But I mean, just because I was so shocked there was even a Christian legal society at all at Vermont Law School, which was #1 for environmental law and was the only other school in the nation that had animal law. So what's the Christian Legal Society doing at this like liberal, super liberal school? It just was bizarre to me. And like they were doing National Day of Prayer. So I kind of got involved just because I was like, felt like, you know what I mean? Like I just wanted it to be like equal. And then I got into it and I'm like, yeah, no, this is definitely an issue.
So yeah, so now you work for the American Humanist Association, and maybe you can talk about what sort of cases you've worked on.
Yeah. So I'd say that our organization didn't have a legal center up until about like 15 years ago. And it started off just doing like amicus briefs to support other groups' cases. And then around the time that I actually joined, we started actually filing our own cases. And they've all been, separation of church and state related, but some of them are more focused on humanism specifically. So one category of my cases I would say are like my humanist prisoner cases, and they're cases where humanist inmates are like, I want to form a meeting group where I can meet with other humanists, because the Rastafarians get a meeting group, the Christians, the Islam, there's all the meeting groups, and the prisons will be like, no, humanism isn't a religion, you don't believe in a God. But there's no reason that they can't sit around and talk for an hour about evolution, social justice issues, other things that pertain to humanism, and especially like in an incarceration setting where rehabilitation and like community and all that's super important. The reasons for having a humanist meeting are like just as strong, if not stronger, than having like an Odinist meeting, which is some weird ancient, not some inmates like resurrected these like old ancient Greek, or like pagan religions that they didn't practice outside of the prisons, and are usually like sort of sub, like like race issues. But anyway, so we have the humanist prisoner cases, and all of those have been successful. I got the entire federal prison system to now recognize humanism.
Oh, wow.
And now in the South, I won very successfully my North Carolina state prisoner case, which was a big success, only because I had a judge that was like notoriously conservative, never ruled in favor of ACLU. I thought I was screwed, and I thought I somehow got him to rule my side.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah. And then of course we've got like legislative prayer, government prayer kind of cases, monument cases. The one that is most known by the public is our big Bladensburg Cross case.
Wait, okay,
where
wait. Before we get
yeah.
before we get to that one, back it up just a little bit, and like,
Sure.
because this is like, so it had been where humanists in federal prison, if you said I'm a humanist and I want a group,
Yeah.
it's denied because there's no God.
Yeah.
So the built-in bias was towards having a deity or some supreme supernatural leader.
Yeah.
That makes it okay.
Well, no. So that was our argument, is
Yeah.
that it's not okay.
But what were their grounds for denying it?
Well, so this is what would happen. This actually has happened in almost all my prison cases, which is like you get like a lot of people saying different things, because like initially it'll be like some low level chaplain that's never heard of humanism, and he's usually the one that says that's not a religion, there's no God. And then someone higher up that's talked to legal has probably been like, oh, we can't say that. So they'll be like, oh, you don't have enough members. And then I'll FOIA, I'll do a public request for like all the schedules and stuff, and it's like, no, like this weird Christian Scientist group has 2 members for the last 2 years, and that you guys have a whole room for them, and there's 5 humanists before I've even put a sign-up sheet outside. So so there's always these post hoc rationalizations, and I think that's why I actually won my North Carolina case, even though I had such a conservative federal judge, because he, I think, didn't like the government and the way that they were such, like, their bullshitting was just so bad.
Yeah.
Like, it was like he was just like, he was like, why, this is such a waste of everyone's time. Like, you made this guy do like 20 forms. Like, and all he wants to do is have a meeting and a locker, and you already recognize Rastafarians and this and that. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell are you doing in my courtroom, kind of thing. So, yeah. So those are. I don't want to say they're easy to win, because it is like a lot of work, and you do have to prove there's discriminatory motive.
Yeah.
And so if they are successful in, like, proving that there's not enough humanists or something, then I could lose. But so far, it's been pretty obvious, the discrimination.
I mean, that's what I find shocking about it, is that it's obvious discrimination that's kind of across the board and generally accepted, and
Yes.
it seems to be like standard operating procedure.
Exactly. And so that was why in my federal case, like the one where it was actually my first humanist prisoner case, and it was against just one federal prison in Oregon. But because I was able to do this like binding settlement agreement, I was actually able to enjoin, like, to have this order apply to the entire federal government, so all of the federal prisons. And I made it like part of the conditions that they put up, like on the like chaplain's bulletin, a whole thing about what humanism is, like an educational thing, so that they're not, they can't claim ignorance for the next one. Yeah.
Awesome.
So you mentioned the Bladensburg Cross case. So this is a case about maintaining a large cross that was set up as a World War I memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, and it's standing on government land. So maybe can you talk a bit about your experience with this case?
Yeah, it was a case that I had won in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, because it was sort of a no-brainer. I should have won. It was a large cross on government property. And up until that point, all of the precedents had said that, when the government displays a cross, it's a Christian symbol, and then it's endorsing Christianity. But then Justice Kennedy stepped down when we had Trump as president, and Justice Kavanaugh got appointed. And then they took the case like the week after he was appointed, even though they like bumped my case like 30 times from the calendar. It was so shady. So once they took it, it's like I knew I was gonna lose, and so my whole thing was just like damage control, and like the really conservative. I had two defendants, like the government, Maryland government, and then I had the American Legion, because they were claiming it was their cross, so they were allowed to participate, which really was a nuisance more than anything else, because it was like I had to write double the briefs, like every time they wrote something I had to respond. And I'm one person, and this was like Jones Day is like the biggest law firm, like one of those like big fancy law firms in DC, and they represented American Legion, and then another fancy law firm represented the government. And like, and then it was like me, and then Trump got involved at the Supreme Court level and filed an amicus brief requesting permission to argue in the case, like not him, but like, the Attorney General. And it was granted. So I had to argue against three defendants, and it was obviously my first case. Like, I think the reporters were saying that I was one of the youngest women to argue in the Supreme Court, but I haven't been able to get like a list. But I know, I mean, clearly, like for the kind of cases, separation of church and state, I think I might be the youngest, but it's besides the point. But just the novelty, like, of the situation of being like up against all the government and like these like, really experienced attorneys, I'm like alone at the table. So from just the like lawyer career standpoint moment, like that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the stakes must have been pretty high as well. So, because it's not, when you take it to the Supreme Court, it's not just about this one cross that's on this one plot of land.
Yeah.
So what was at stake overall?
Well, so the lawyers that were for the American Legion were their group was called First Liberty.
And they claim it's their cross. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and they were saying, but their arguments were like overturn the precedent, like say that there's no separation of church and state, like bend the precedent to say Christianity can be preferred. Like they were saying this is a Christian cross, no doubt, but like it's allowed because we're a Christian nation. Whereas the government, this is Maryland, they're secular. Like they hired Neil Katyal, who's more or less a Democrat. I mean, we're friends. Neil and I, we've been friends since the case, but and he was my opposing counsel, but he's not. the discovery documents from the government showed that they didn't really want the cross anymore. It was crumbling. They had to spend another $100,000. That was part of the issue. It's like, it's one thing if this was just some passive thing, but the government had earmarked $100,000 to restore it because it's like in this median and crumbling, falling apart because it's 100 years old, and even their own experts had called it an eyesore. So they were like, let's just do demolition by neglect. But of course, publicly, they're like, oh, we have to save our cross.
Yeah.
But so the government's position was not, it was actually like, oh, no, it's not, because they don't really care about the religion. So they're like, whatever, it's a secular symbol, just represents all the war veterans. Like, it means Jewish, it means atheist. And Christians were like, wait, what? Like, that's not what it means. Yeah. So it was such a weird conglomeration at the Supreme Court because I had a ton of Christians on my side. Actually, like organizations representing like millions of Christians, like Methodists, Seventh-day Adventists, the Baptists, all these groups joined briefs because they were like, the government's arguments are offensive and water down the meaning of our cross. We don't want the government putting it up on property. We don't want you interpreting it. And ultimately, I wanted the court to take the government stance, which was like preserve the precedent, and then just say this one cross is so secular by its nature of its history and its whatever. So that's what we ended up with is a ruling that's very fractured. You really can't. It's very hard to apply it to anything beyond old crosses and other monuments that frankly are already kind of grandfathered in. Like, no one would challenge any of those with this court, even if this ruling hadn't been, in place.
It's nice to hear that religious groups recognize that the separation of church and state is there to preserve them as well.
Yes. And I would thank specifically the Baptist Joint Commission. I can't remember if it's commission or committee, but Holly Hallman was fantastic, and she was out there with some of the other folks with her organization on the front steps, with us, and being really vocal and rallying other Christians. And same with the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. They're not an atheist organization. In fact, they think they've tended to have religious leaders. And anyway, but their whole pitch has always been that this, church state separation protects religion. I think they're so polite and like amicable. I love working with them, that they're not like loud and in your face. I tend to think, and this is just me, this is an unofficial statement, but I kind of do think there's a line of authentic, devout Christians, and then there's like the political Christians, and then there's sheeple, they're gonna follow whatever. But I feel like a lot of the folks that were on our side are the ones that are like, we really don't want the government touching our religion, like, kind of like an Amish or like Mormons, like they don't want the government touching their religion, period. Like, why would you want that? So I think it's more, I'm not saying that that's a better thing necessarily, like that. I think there's a lot of, poor education in those communities, but I don't know, there's something to me about taking the stance that's like, we want the nativity scene on the government lawn. Like, what Christians want that?
Well,
I just don't know.
I think part of the answer is in this case where you have a state government spending $100,000 to preserve a religious symbol. They want to dominate the state or work with the state and have the state, work in their interest, which is what we've seen in a lot of other cases.
It is, but it's still, it still befuddles me because it's like the amount of money and resources that goes into like defending this kind of case. Like the First Liberty, like the group that funded the Jones Day law firm, for instance, like, the amount of money that they could have just taken and restored the cross themselves. Like, I know money is definitely a factor, but I don't know, like the motives always, my head, I just don't know. I don't get it.
Right.
Yeah, I sort of feel like there's something about, religious groups, like if they're in power, like they don't support secularism, but like if they become a minority group, then they're in favor of it.
Exactly.
But I mean, I do think it makes sense, like to frame separation of church and state like as something that potentially benefits all groups. I wonder if I can ask, like, what do you think today are sort of some of the most like pressing issues with regard to secularism and humanism?
I mean, frankly, just the sheer makeup of the federal judiciary itself is
Mm.
an issue. Not only at the Supreme Court level, which is obvious now because we've got Amy, we've got Brett,
Mhm.
Mhm.
we've got a very like it's a very strong Christian conservative majority with Trump appointed judges and justices dominating a large portion of that conservative bloc. Then you've got all the federal appointments that were by former President Trump, and this is an issue like because his appointments are all like Federalist Society specifically like specifically people that have expressed something that they wanted to overturn. Like they're not people that were like when I get a Bush appointed judge, I still feel like I have a chance. In fact, the way politics are in these judges, like I've lost to Clinton judges and I've won to Bush senior judges and Reagan judges. So I probably have won more cases with conservative judges than I have with Democrat ones, to be honest. Like I don't know why that shakes out, but the point being, but with Trump judges, zero chance they're on my side. They've all been every Trump judge I've had, both at the Supreme Court and in the lower federal courts, have been so antagonistic. Like it's not just like, oh, you lose. It's like I'm going to write a 30-page dissertation in a concurrence on all the little reasons. So I'd say number one is like this nasty, antagonistic, this court system that's hell bent on tearing down the wall of church-state separation. We have to navigate that. A lot of our groups have cases that have been pending in the federal courts for years and years and years. Like I have some Obama era cases
Wow.
that I can't just rip out of the hands of federal judges now. So like we have to deal with our existing cases. We have to tell clients that come to us with really legitimate church state separation violations, sorry, now is not the time. Like we're not going to win this, and it could really derail progress, precedent. So that's like the biggest. And then you've got the Supreme Court, like the specific decisions that are in the pipeline that are kind of terrifying to all of us church state separation litigators. Really, frankly, they should be terrifying to every single citizen in our country because of how important church state separation is to our democracy. But those of us that are aware of how important it is to our democracy are sitting here like, holy F, like this is
Mhm.
bad.
Yeah.
Sorry to be all
That's
doomsday.
No, no.
that's a hell of a challenge. So now shifting gears,
Yeah,
let's talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
your other
Thank you.
job,
Yeah, that's great.
which is the Nonhuman Rights Project. Tell us more about that. How did you get involved,
Sure.
and what does it do?
Well, I will say just as the pivot that it does make me happy to have two jobs. Sometimes I feel a little bit like a crazy lady with two jobs because it's like they're both very intense and like emotional like intensity, but obviously like work wise. But it is moments like when I feel like things are going off the rails, with the church state. It's almost like the reverse of my forecast, which was like we need to get church state separation established in order to get animal
Yeah,
rights. Well,
yeah,
animal rights are actually now might be surpassing
yeah.
human rights. I don't want to say for better or worse, but I will say like I think it's a product of our effective strategy that we've been working on for years and how we've landed there. But to back up, yeah, I guess I would just say from being a kid on, I was always just very passionate about animal rights issues. It was obvious to me that there was a disparity in treatment between how cows were treated. I would take drives. We would go to Pasadena for Christmas and pass by Harris Ranch on the 5 freeway. And Kauschwitz is a word I've used before to describe it. It's just, maybe if you've lived in the Midwest, you've seen CAFOs, the controlled animal factory operations. But like seeing sentient beings like crammed together as just like a child that's aware of animals, like it made my stomach churn. So I don't know. I always wanted to fight that sort of injustice. And once I learned that animals are considered property and have no rights, but humans have all the rights, regardless of whether they're autonomous and ever able to even exercise their rights. That's so arbitrary and unfair and unjust that I didn't just want to work on animal rights issues, but I wanted to really work on sort of the underpinning of what it means to be, a rights bearing entity. And I was really amazed to hear this professor give a talk at an animal law conference my first year in law school, because it was like, I could not believe my ears. He was talking about exactly what I went to law school to do, which was that, to really sort of change this disparity. And he was giving this talk about personhood for animals and how he was looking for some volunteers. He had just started this group and he needed, volunteer researchers. And I was like, "Oh, pick me." And he didn't that year. Like,
Oh.
he probably got like a ton of, because it's so funny now. Like, he's like, "I would never have passed over you," but I'm like, he probably, knowing how he like types, like we always make fun of him, but he like types like he like with his fingers, like it's like I could just see how that email got lost. But I love Steve, so I can say that. But but then the next year, because I was persistent and I was like, hey, I'm in this animal law class and I have to pick a final paper and I don't want to be redundant of the research that your group is doing. And he's like, oh, you're like, send me your resume, whatever. And he's like, oh, do you want to be like a volunteer? And I was like, cool. And so he put me on one group, and then he liked me so much, he was like, can you join this other group? And so then I did that, and then it led to me being it was the second employee that he hired after my friend Natalie. Yeah. So it was really cool to have that kind of experience, to like see the speaker, and then get hired. And like I said, the only conflict I had was that the American Humanist Association, that, one of the few groups in the country that does church state, had also offered me a job. And so I was like, wow, I'm so lucky, but like, how do I choose? And so I got extra lucky that both of my bosses supported the work that I was doing at the other one so much that they were like, do both. You've proven that you can do both. You've proven you can do a ton. So just do it. So yeah, I'm so lucky, because I've been able to really live and feel the successes that we've had, these big milestones, going from, we would have these meetings in like Steve's room at the Doubletree Hotel in New York Times Square. And we'd be filmed for our HBO documentary, Unlocking the Cage. But like, I didn't know it was for HBO. I don't think any of us knew it was going to be HBO. So we kind of were just like always chillaxing with this film crew, and like, it's just this funny little environment. And to think, oh my gosh, like, not like funny little environment, but it was like a group of like law students and volunteer, one or two volunteer litigators, and Steve, my boss, and then like the film guys. And so yeah, anyways, just now we're here sitting before the highest court of New York, and they're prepared to determine whether our client, Happy the elephant, is entitled to the right to bodily liberty. It's really exciting to have the court take the case, because usually, they only take the case when they want to overturn something, usually. So that's really good news for us, because we lost in the court below, but not really because the court thought we should lose, but more because the court's hands were tied. It wasn't a high court.
So what would that ruling look like? I mean, if we're talking about extending rights to non-humans, in this case, an elephant, what does it look like if you win? In practice, what does it mean if we have rights for animals like that? What is the goal ultimately?
So because we're using the common law and we're using the ancient writ of habeas corpus, what we're actually doing is necessarily narrow. Just like any sort of common law, it builds upon itself. So it's not that, so there will be precedent set, and precedent can apply to the next case and the next case, but it's not like legislation where tomorrow, if we win this, that all of the elephants in New York are going to get freedom. And to even narrow that further, there's not a ton of elephants in New York. But more importantly, all it would do would be to say that Happy, I don't want to say all it would do, because it would be monumental from a precedent standpoint, but from like what actually happens and its actual practical application, is that Happy the elephant will probably get transferred to one of the sanctuaries that we've identified as ones that would respect her autonomy. She can't be released into the wild, back into a native environment. She was captured since birth. But she can go to one of these sanctuaries where she'll have acres of freedom, and potentially be able to interact with other elephants, which she's being deprived of right now. And so anyways, it's a parallel to what happened with Black slaves before the 13th Amendment. when they were considered non-legal persons, not, people that did not, they're obviously people, but from a legal standpoint had no legal rights and were not considered legal persons, were able to use this ancient common law writ of habeas corpus and, to establish their freedom. And so if a court, say in the Somerset case in England, where it was a famous Lord Mansfield set this slave free, and it was the starting point of the abolition of slavery in England, but it only freed Mansfield. It only freed the slave. It did not actually establish all freedom for all.
Because it's not
Right.
a law.
Exactly. It's not a law. It's just one
yeah.
writ for one person.
It's not
So
legislated. It's a single place.
Yeah. Exactly. So it starts the ball rolling, and it allows for, time for society to kind of catch up, to grasp it, for legislation to come, because inevitably what happens is that there is legislation, and we do end up seeing mass emancipation. States started to do that, but and that would be our goal. Or we obviously want to see animals that are autonomous, that are not being able to exercise their autonomy, be able to at least have the right to seek some sort of freedom, or have a court evaluate that. Yeah.
So is this primarily, or specifically about animals in captivity?
Well, captivity, yeah, animals in detention. So yes, like if in the same way that if a human was being detained in this type of environment,
Hence
it
the
would
use
be
of
like
habeas
detention.
corpus.
Yeah, so like there'd be no need to. It wouldn't be. The thing is, once you're sort of a rights bearer, like if the precedent in California is that, let's just say that elephants, the court could theoretically, I guess, declare that all elephants are legal persons in New York. I don't know how that would work, but let's just say that they can do that. That would mean that those elephants have the right to be free, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the form of enclosure is barring that. So they might have the right to get into the court and have, okay, you want your writ. Okay, we're looking at the writ, and look, you're not in captivity. Your autonomy is not being infringed. There's no illegal detention here. So if it was a human, you can just kind of look at a parallel, like a prisoner out on parole or something, seeking writ of habeas corpus. The court says, well, you're already out, so you don't need this remedy. Yeah. So it's like he still has the right to be free. He just doesn't. It's not being violated.
I see. But this is the sort of style we're talking about. It's not. We're not going to have elephants running down the street. We're just saying you can't keep them chained up or in small enclosures. They need to be somewhere where
Right.
they have this freedom of movement. They need to be treated with this level of respect.
Exactly. And the reality is that, like, there's already a trend against, elephants in captivity. So it's like, I don't feel like there's a big demand that we're up against for that. So
yeah, I don't know. Are there laws that already speak to this?
No, I mean that's the point too, is that like legislation's not efficient. It's not effective. Like if we had a system where there was just all these laws in place and elephants were not, I mean, living in captivity, like living in a situation that they're isolated, they have one little, acre, where elephants in the wild have like thousands. It's just, and like scientifically it's just proven that they're suffering from these enclosures. Like there's no reason that we should be doing that, but the laws don't forbid it. The laws have allowed traveling circuses. Our elephants in our Connecticut case died during our litigation. We had chimpanzees in the start of our work, where we had lost some of the plaintiffs that we identified, and it's actually captured in the documentary, where we're like about to file a case for was it Charlie? We lost Charlie, and then why am I blanking? It was like really traumatic. I mean, we really kind of got we got attached to these. It took us so long to pick out what state we were going to file in, and then what plaintiffs, like what species, and then among the species which ones. And we would we printed off like profiles, and we talked to experts, and we put so much thought behind picking our plaintiffs, and we really fell in love with these our plaintiffs, and then they all died almost predictably because of issues relating to the heart conditions from captivity and stuff. So yeah, Yeah, it's really sad. So anyway, so I think that when more people are aware of that, and there's so many alternatives, like now with the 3D goggles. I sound so old saying that, like, but like those, like the Oculus or
Yeah.
something, but they're
Uh-huh.
like,
The
I mean,
metaverse
there's a way
now. It's
to
been the
do, yeah,
Yeah.
metaverse for a month, I think.
there's a way to do education and using wildlife, because I've seen wildlife through those. There's some animal rights groups that have done demos, and it's like way cooler than going to a zoo and like a smelly, like, hot zoo, and seeing animals just like circle around that. Like, they don't act, it's not educational because you're not seeing an animal in its natural environment. You're seeing it, an animal that's suffering, and that's not educational. There's really no defense. There's no reason to be having elephants in captivity at this point.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I guess like you're focused on mostly like elephants and
Mhm.
dolphins and like the great apes, like who are highly intelligent. But do you see a similar strategy? Could a similar strategy work for like all other animals?
Not in my lifetime. I don't think we'll see habeas corpus and the right to bodily liberty for all animals, and I just don't think it would be relevant or necessary. Maybe not all animals have the need for autonomy. It wouldn't be practical, for instance, like at the level of like micro
Well,
microbes
yeah,
or
right,
like
right,
ants.
right.
But I think it's really easy to say that at a minimum, we don't have to draw the floor. Like, we don't have to say which animals at what level. We know right now that there are highly sentient, highly autonomous, highly intelligent species that are similarly situated to humans for the purposes of the right to bodily liberty. That there's humans that have, no cognition, that have all these rights, and this is just one basic right. It's not the right to bear arms, or the right to do anything other than just not be infringed upon. And so, if that makes sense. So it's like, we don't have to be the ones that decide what the lowest level species is that should be entitled to this. We're just saying, at a minimum, these elephants, at a minimum, chimpanzees. Dogs have been so domesticated that it might not be infringing. So far there's no science. Science doesn't prove that animals, dogs are suffering with humans.
Mm.
Science shows
Right,
that
Mhm.
right.
we've really domesticated each other, and we've grown sort of
Mm-hmm.
together. And if anything, dogs kind of helped us evolve.
I'm curious about like digging down into this because there's a weird gap, at least
Hmm.
like philosophically for me, that maybe you can fill in.
Hmm.
Because on the one hand, we have humanism, which is very, anthropocentric, right? It's focused on humanity and what's the best for humanity. And we've talked to other people on this show who either rejected that because like, no, it's
Yeah.
about, we need to be centered on the individual. And other people are like, no, that's way wrong. We need to think
Hmm.
more holistically. We need to think about the earth as a whole or nature as a whole. And this, like, Monica, I can't quite place the view. How do you bring in like these other mammals like whales and dolphins and the great apes into this sort of concept of which is human centered,
Hmm.
of rights, and law, of legal rights, I should say.
Hmm. I see what you're saying. I mean, it's interesting because I gave a talk recently to the Satanic Temple, and one of their I actually gave one to the Satanic Temple, and then recently to one of their chapters, and they were curious about my animal rights, and one of like the Satanic Temple, or at least this group's like tenets, was like that they're all vegetarian, which I didn't realize that, so I thought I
Wow.
was talking to like a more novel,
Yeah.
or like at least they all respected animals. Like, I was surprised at how like receptive and like they were about the animal stuff, because I thought they would be more curious about it, and it was kind of like, no, 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 we totally accept that animals should have rights. So because really they're ultimately just atheist humanists that are they worship Satan kind of in jest, but that's another story. But with humanism, I have worked for the American Humanist Association for quite a while now, about 10 years, and then plus my internships. And I've encountered some vegans and animal rights folks that are humanists that would argue like humanism like requires that, almost to the like in the same way that I would say like the Satanists have said that, like in the sense that they're, in order to be a humanist, you adopt a view of like, trying to be as ethical as possible, and like the, not utilitarian, but sort of like the, what is it, the effective altruist, kind of more in that zone. I don't take that stance per se. I don't think humanism really requires that, but there's in our humanist aspirations, also known as the manifesto. I think it's our third one iteration that's on the website that I think is the final one. So there's room for that argument in several of the, I don't want to say tenets because that sounds too religious-y, but are like, I guess, aspirations. And I think one of them was like, yeah, recognizing that like we're part of nature, like we're part of the world, we're not separate from it, and that we kind of have a sort of a stewardship responsibility. And then there's also the science part of it, and it's like we solve science, we solve world's problems with science, and clearly climate change we've identified as a world problem, and the meat industry is unquestionably a contributor to climate change in a lot of different, both direct and indirect ways, which I've studied in grad school. But the bottom line is like at least like eating less meat, using more of the technology that science has provided through impossible meats and like all the amazing ways you can get protein and stuff without eating meat. Like anyway, I'm just saying there's doctrinally, if you want to go into like our humanist literature, but for me, I don't necessarily, I've never really felt like I've had to square the two because I'm not like trying to fit a triangle into a circle. I'm like, I'm a humanist and I also am a staunch believer that animals should have rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the things that happens when you become an atheist is it opens up all these possibilities that are dogmatically closed off and
Mm-hmm.
really sort of, if not exactly siloed, but like, the idea that they don't belong together.
Yeah.
And like this, even hearing that like there's a vegetarian chapter of the
Yeah.
Satanic Temple is wild, right? Like it's exactly that. Like these are the things that don't belong together, but now they are together and they make perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, like, I think it's just some cognitive dissonance too. It's like people don't really want to change. And like a lot of humanists are like long time humanists. And if you just come in and it's like all of a sudden humanists are vegetarians, like they're gonna have some political problems.
Yeah,
They're like,
yeah,
they're not gonna just
yeah,
go, yeah, okay, fine.
right.
I'm gonna start eating your weird tofu stuff.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't picture that.
We just
I've been to our conferences. I don't see us serving tofu anytime soon as like an entree and that being okay. But that's not, it's like, I think I'm just a practical, realistic person. And I think the best way to encourage people to change their behavior is certainly not through telling them what to do or like, so I think that saying that there's room within our aspirations for animal rights is unequivocal, but like to say that it requires it, I think is not at all the case. But I think they're definitely harmonized, so much so to the point that one could fairly make an argument that it's required. But if you were to look at religion in that way, like, oh, the Bible says this, that's required. But
well, we might have to check you on that because there are plenty of rules about what a true atheist can and cannot do. I don't know if it's
yeah.
time yet.
Well,
Yeah.
atheists and humanists, I think that's the difference too that I'm making. Yeah, atheist is just the disbelief in God or gods. And that's what I like about humanism and being able to work within this. It's all this stuff that I believe in that's pro. It's pro environmental, it's pro social justice, it's pro
Mm.
people, it's pro. Like I said, I argue it's pro animals. It doesn't mean like it requires that you do all those things, but its affirmations are in the favor of science and progress and those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, in that case, let's move on. Maybe we can change can a true atheist to change it to a true humanist. Nathan, can you walk us through this one? How are we doing this today?
Yeah. So this is our lightning round. Yeah, we'll change it to can a true humanist do such and such.
Oh, you
Um,
can say atheist. I mean, I'm
okay.
both.
No,
I
we're
mean,
going with humanists now.
Yeah.
You drew the
I'm
line,
asking me either.
Monica. We're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually had, like you mentioned, the Satanic Temple. We had maybe a couple months ago. We had Lucian Greaves on.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we changed it for him to can a true Satanist do this or that. Um, anyway, so yeah, so the game is basically can a true humanist do such and such? Like if they don't do that, then they get their humanist card taken away
Yeah,
from them.
yeah.
Um,
It's tongue
so
in
yeah, so
cheek.
we'll
It's in jest.
yeah. hmm
Okay.
So we'll just ask some questions and just give a brief sort of explanation for what you think. So the first one, can a true humanist consume animal products?
Mm.
I would like to argue that they shouldn't.
Mm.
But I wouldn't say they can't, because I think we also believe in freedom and free thought, and I think that overrides like a command. But I think that a true humanist would consider the arguments that one should eat less meat and perhaps disavow it completely.
Good to know. Okay, Monica, can a true humanist use the prayer emoji?
I use it, and then I put it in parentheses. I put happy humanist hands or grateful humanist hands, or and I've had people be like, I really like that. Because I have to clarify, because I'm like, I didn't lose my mind. I'm not praying. I'm not, yeah.
Right. Yes.
Just being
That-
grateful.
yeah.
I like it. So basically, there's an asterisk attached here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like,
Right.
it's
You
more,
need
yeah,
a
like a legal
clarification.
parenthetical. Yeah.
Can a true humanist believe humans are special?
I don't think so, because I
Mm,
think a true
mhm,
humanist believes that we're just all star stuff.
mm,
And that we just sort of, I mean, yeah, I guess we're special. Okay, yeah, maybe. I guess if you define special
yeah.
as like
Yeah.
our clump of cell, our atoms formed to be, of a higher intelligence, I guess that makes us special.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. I like that one. How about this one? Can a true humanist own a pet?
That one is interesting. So I don't own a pet, and it's kind of one of those things that like I know that most of my friends that own pets are like adopted animals and stuff, but again, kind of going back to my effective altruism stance, like I would get, if I had like a little, three-legged pound puppy right now, like that would be so much fun and so cute and like so entertaining, but also so time consuming, and then I wouldn't be able to focus on my, the work that I have had 10 years of training doing, like the habeas corpus for elephants, like my time would be sucked out. So that's my own rationale right now. But I think from an ethical standpoint, I think almost from the sense that there's so many animals that are in need of adoption and that could use homes. Yes, I think owning a pet from like a puppy mill and from a pet store is unethical. And I think humanists are ethical, strive to be as ethical as possible based off of what we know to be true about science. And science would say they're, suffering and X, Y, and Z. So I would say a true humanist would not own a pet from a known abusive source.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Can a true humanist tell their kids that Santa Claus is real?
Yes. Yes, but I think I also, this is what, like, it's so funny that I thought about that earlier, but I know some friends that have been vocal, humanist friends have been vocal and almost calling it like abusive, that they felt lied to. And my parents were so like, I think there's one point where they said that he was real, and then when I could read my mom's handwriting, he wasn't. It wasn't a big deal, but I don't really remember any specific time where they sat me down and told me he was real. So like I don't have that full experience of like he was a lie, but I don't know. I guess like I don't know if it comes to like someone else's kid and like their parents, like I don't want to be the one that's like breaking the news. I don't know. I'll leave that one for the masses because I don't have kids. I don't feel like it's fair for me to weigh in.
Always finding out, Monica. All right, how about this one? Can a true humanist cut down an old, tall, beautiful tree just to get a little more light in their bedroom?
Oh, cut the whole thing down.
Yeah. The whole thing.
And it's an old tree, and it's like, would it continue to live? Like what's its like, is it like an old redwood, or is it like a kind of crackly old tree that can be replaced? I mean, look, I don't know.
Anywhere in your imagination. It's tall enough to block out a bedroom window.
I think you can be a true humanist and do that. I think that the person that would be doing that would be probably, a little bit ignorant of maybe the history of the tree. But now I feel sad for that tree. Poor tree. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. Not just to get a little extra light.
Okay, yeah. There needs to be more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, fortunately, it's
All right.
just a
Yeah.
hypothetical.
I'm over expressing about this tree now.
Yeah.
I'm working well with hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Really immerse myself in them.
All right. Last one, Nathan. You want to take it?
I see two here
Well,
actually, but
pick one.
okay. Well, can a true humanist pray to animals?
Uh,
Ooh.
No, I don't think a true human. Well, okay, we do have like members. We have like a small faction of members that would probably consider themselves theistic and pray to some higher power. But I don't think I define humanism as a non-theistic beliefs, worldview.
Mm.
So to the extent that prayer is an invocation of a higher power, then no, a true humanist does not pray to animals.
Mm. Wow.
All right.
Excellent. Wait a
It
minute.
was
Okay.
fun.
All right. Maybe we'll bring back one more. Can you pray to a God that takes the shape of a sentient animal or a higher
No,
power that takes such a shape?
just no praying, no higher
There
powers.
we
Like
go.
none of this
No.
witchery.
No.
No,
You can only make
no
grateful
true
hands
crystals
to
or
them.
either. Yeah, no like crystals or like
Mm,
horoscopes.
Mm.
I feel like some of that stuff is really taking a hold over here in California, and I'm like, stop,
mm,
stop! Like this girl at this music store was like, oh, there's a crystal shop opening up next door. Are you so excited? And
Oh,
I'm just thinking, like, what is a crystal shop? Like a bead store? Like, what
mm.
are they just gonna like open up things? Like, I don't know.
yeah.
It's scary to me, but
That is truly wacky. But
yeah,
at least it's not a church, so we've got that going.
yeah.
It's
No,
one
I
a
know. It's
step
kind of one of
removed.
those things where it's like maybe this is if they have to place if some people are hardwired to believe in something and they
Mm.
need to, I'd rather they place that faith in crystals than in like these conglomerate, Texas like mega church
Yeah,
leaders.
totally. Yeah, pick your poison. All right, Monica,
Exactly.
this was enlightening. It was
Yay!
amazing. It was
Yay!
it was a journey, I feel.
It was a journey.
Anything you want to plug? Anyone you want to thank? Any shout outs?
No, I'm really grateful to have been on the show.
Oh, we're thankful that you were here.
All right. That was Monica Miller, and that was a lot of fun talking with her. Todd, what were your main takeaways?
Well, the first thing is she's not a sad sack millennial case who even needs two jobs to get by. That's like she's
Yeah.
taken on two incredible tasks and is putting in the work where it's needed.
Yeah.
And one of the big takeaways that caught me by surprise is sort of like that the organizational power that's kind of behind the scenes. I mean, right, like what she's talking about, individual cases and the law, it's fascinating on its own. But that stuff behind the scenes that really struck me were things like organizing secular groups in law schools, right? And how that's necessary to counter the power of Christian groups in law schools, which I had never even considered. And that runs side by side with what they're doing in prisons, right? Saying like, well, we want a humanist group, which was really shocking how that revealed sort of the institutional biases that still exist against atheists. You want to have a Christian group, no problem. You want a Muslim group, no problem. Buddhist, Rasta, Zoroastrian, that's fine, but you can't have an atheist group. That's telling that those biases are still there, and the work that Monica is doing is still necessary, and the work that we can do organizing, anybody can just do it. You can start it.
Yeah, I think there's such, with regard to like that secular law group, I think she mentioned it's like the Federalist Society or something who,
Yeah.
I don't think maybe they're not explicitly connected to these Christian groups, but I think it's like a pretty well coordinated kind of like pipeline of sort of conservative lawyers. And I think that's like, it's also about like money and sort of like institutional setups and so on. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
interesting. It's also about like getting like fighting to actually start these groups in the first place.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Clearly. And to keep them running.
Hmm
Right? And that it's necessary. Yeah, because like groups like the Federalist Society are incredibly well organized, right? Top down, and their approach is that courts are counter majoritarian. They're free from the democratic process. So that's where conservatives can take the most power. And they've done that, they've been pretty specific about it. They've created the lists of judges that they wanted appointed, and Trump just checked those boxes, just did
Yeah,
exactly that.
right. Yeah, and I think that's like that may well be one of Trump's like biggest legacies, although
It's not really
it's
his.
just no, but I mean like under his presidency, I guess. And it does make it like I mean it because it's so well organized, like it's so like you say, it's just like here's a list of judges we want appointed, and it's like okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and he just did it, like,
yeah.
and went to bat for
Um
him.
and even I wonder about like Kavanaugh and Amy Comey, or is it
Comey
Coney? But
Barrett, yeah, it's tough
yeah,
to get out of your mouth.
yeah. I wonder if they were they connected to the Federalist Society too. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, I mean that's it's just a straight line. The interesting thing, I mean, this is a bit of an aside, but the interesting thing about Amy Comey Barrett is she is the only one who is not a Yale or Harvard or both graduate,
Right. Yeah. Right.
right?
That's yeah.
Which is a very interesting part of the Trump legacy. Of course, she came from Notre Dame, and she's got that religious background. That's part of what got her there. But if we're going to form a secular world, and we talked about this, that it's not necessarily identity politics. It's the idea that you don't trust people. If you want people to make secular institutions secular, you should probably have secular people do it. And then when we're looking at the world and we're seeing, well, more and more people are non-religious, the institutions should reflect that. We should have the people who go through law school become the lawyers become senators, the lawyers become judges. Like that's a place it needs to start, and that's an amazing connection. And likewise with the weird sort of solidarity between the humanist organization, the Humanist Association, and the Satanic Temple, right? That there are these sort of like grassroots in the Satanic Temple, and on the other hand, you have this legal association, this group that aims explicitly at lawsuits, and that they find common ground and they work together on the same cases and beyond. That's another great thing that we're seeing now, these connections between groups of people who I really didn't expect them to be connected at all, and of course they are, which is great. That's what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Like to pool resources and so on. Yeah.
And just outreach and coordination and build solidarity in the movement. So there are opportunities to do it. It is happening. Things like this don't happen by themselves, but once they get going, they have their own rhythm and pace. Anything in particular you wanted to talk about? Because there's another thing that's hanging out there that I've got to mention.
Well, I wanted to mention like the vegetarian issue because I think she mentioned I don't know if she said she's vegan or vegetarian, but she said like that one satanic temple congregation or whatever or chapter or whatever um, was like sort of committed to vegetarianism, and it does seem that there is some kind of connection. I mean, like I think
Yeah,
we were
this is
talking
exactly
that
what I was thinking. We keep running
yeah
into this.
yeah, and so I think like I'm sort of mostly for the most part vegetarian and trying to like hopefully one day go vegan,
Hmm.
and you are in a
I'm
similar
vegan at
place.
home.
Right, but you're lactose intolerant.
That's
I
true,
remember.
but
Right.
I still get points. That
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, he, no,
yeah.
yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, I think we all kind of make our own rules by it. We all develop an ethos that fits our needs. So I don't live completely without meat. I don't live completely without animal products. I mean, eggs especially, or something. Eggs are really one of the only things I eat at home. But for the most part, yeah, we've both been, at the very least, reductitarians.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I didn't. The correlation is just too strong at this point. So if
Mm-hmm.
anybody has researched this, if anybody studied it or knows anything about it, Nath G. Alexander on the Twitters. Let us know, because we got to figure this thing out. This deserves more.
I think there's probably something about like really kind of thinking hard about how to live like an ethical life. Maybe like I guess it's because maybe when you are not religious, like you do have a chance to kind of like reconsider any kind of all your entire kind of moral framework, I suppose. That could be. I mean, obviously, like I think there's probably many religious traditions that are also like vegetarian in some way or vegan. But yeah, it does seem like there is a connection. It would be interesting to know if there's any research like specifically on that, whether like charting vegetarianism by religious affiliation.
Yeah. Or just
Yeah, that'd be
even just like
interesting.
statistically, like how many, it's got to be in one of the surveys,
Hmm.
like how much are atheists vegan, or non-religion and vegetarianism would be
Yeah,
fascinating. And I
it
mean,
would. Yeah.
so the thing that we're projecting onto it immediately is like, okay, right, like you get rid of a traditional morality, you get to choose your own. You get to question the
Hmm.
morality that you've been given, and you can come to different conclusions. Also, the idea of traditions, right? Like we're not fixed to these traditions anymore. We get to recreate them in the way that we want, which is part of this, like the liberatory project that we see beyond atheism, right? You get to reconsider morality, tradition. You get to set your ethos. You find what works for you and matches your beliefs and how you see the world, which we're not able to do under religion. So it's got to be. It's probably we're assuming it's tied to that, but it's. I mean, it's an example of a manifestation of it. It's really surprising.
Yeah, because it's not. I mean, the connection is not directly like it's not obvious that this should follow or they should obviously be linked, but it does seem like they are.
Totally. And I
So
mean,
yeah.
this is one of the great things about talking to Monica is both the text that she's talking about, the work that the humanists do, the work that the Non-Human Rights Project does, fascinating. What she's accomplished is fascinating, but also like all of this subtext is really, really interesting. All of these little things that she dropped throughout, really illuminating, and they lead to the next question, which is always feels good for a project like this. So yeah, that one I noticed it really stuck out. It's a fun one. All right. Let's see. Who should we thank today, Nathan? Is there anyone we need to thank? Anything we need to link to? Anything we need to tell people about?
We should just mention one more time the organizations Monica's affiliated with or works with, the Non-Human Rights Project and the American Humanist Association, and we'll drop links for those in the notes and everything. And also just to mention that there's a documentary about the Non-Human Rights Project called Unlocking the Cage, which I guess is through HBO, I think.
I think it's still streaming. We'll put links below for
Yeah.
everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and of course, I remembered it this time. Thank the audience. Why we do this. Big ups to you guys for listening. If you want to support us, visit our Patreon page. Who else do we have to thank other than Monica Miller, of course?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Can't forget her. And Red Japan, who supplies our excellent theme song.
Every week, they never fail. And yeah, complaints, problems, biases, or if you have research that connects atheism to
Hmm.
vegetarianism, please contact Nath G. Alexander. And I think that's it until next time. Like the button, smash the button, pull the string, kick the dog. Don't kick the dog. Don't
Yeah.
kick the tree stump. Don't kick the tree stump.
Right. Yeah. Don't kick
Don't
anything.
kick. Don't shove. Just like and subscribe. And we'll see you later.